In September 2025, Netflix released an hour-and-a-half documentary titled Unknown Number: The High School Catfish. And now in this documentary, it follows an insane real-life catfishing case where a mysterious unknown figure manipulated dozens of teenagers from the same high school through an anonymous fake persona where they contacted each and every one of these teenagers via a spoofed phone number and sent them hurdles of abuse, horrific language, threats, and so much more over the space of a 2-year period. And this story right now on social media and just in general in the real world is absolutely blowing up. I have spoken to so many people about this catfishing story, and it all particularly focuses around two specific teenagers, Lauryn Licari and Owen McKenny, who were both around 13 to 14 years old at the time of this story taking place. And now the documentary explains how this unknown catfish manipulated both of these figures in the worst way possible, going into some extremely dark territories, but most importantly revealing who this catfish actually was. And I think the main thing a lot of people took from this documentary at the ending of it was just, it's hard to really completely 100% trust anyone after seeing a story like this, because it could be your closest friend or family member, but for all you know, they could be doing things behind the scenes to make your life a living hell. And this documentary was a prime example of that. But despite my interest and intrigue into this story, the funny thing is, well, I actually didn't like this documentary. In fact, I think this documentary from Netflix was incredibly irresponsible. I don't think it told the complete 100% accurate story, and I actually think it allowed the culprit in this story to basically get away with seemingly everything. And don't get me wrong, this documentary was definitely interesting. It was one of those Netflix films that really just made me put down my phone for an entire hour and listen to a compelling story. But that doesn't come from the fact that, oh, this was such an amazing documentary, it was so well put together. No, the only reason I put down my phone for this one was because, well, the real authentic story in itself was interesting. Everything else on Netflix's part, I think, was genuinely done quite terribly. Because in my mind, there are so many issues with how Netflix handled this story, to the point of where the culprit and the criminal was even, in my opinion, allowed to defend themselves in front of millions of people. And in today's video, what I want to do is just break everything down, explore this story, and get to the bottom of, well, what is the truth in the unknown number high school catfishing case? Because yes, there are multiple things that we need to go through today, and the main one being, well, the real story. We need to explore everything that the documentary left out and go through everything step by step in working out how this story actually happened and why the villain and culprit in this story did what they did. And by doing that, I then want to move into the topic surrounding the fact that, well, in my opinion, this Netflix documentary makes the culprit and villain in this story look far less worse than they actually are. I want to go through the court proceedings that I found online. I want to go into everything to do with Kendra Licari and how this story is just unbelievably worse than Netflix were presenting it to be. And yes, there is a lot that we need to go through today, and this is going to be quite a messy deep dive because, trust me, there is so much information that I think a lot of you do not know, even if you have looked into the story and read about it yourselves. I think there may be some key information and details that you don't know, whether that's, just you not looking into the story, or whether the fact that Netflix completely botched this story. We're going to go through it all today. So yes, sit back and relax, because honestly, I just need to talk about all of this. I watched this documentary and it was very interesting, but I came out of this thing feeling angry. I even went onto my Instagram.com/inabber, I should say, straight away and posted a very angry story about, I can't believe how Netflix handled this. I can't believe what they did, and I just need to talk about it. And clearly a lot of you also do, because I've received a lot of messages saying basically the exact same thing. So yes, This is the story surrounding the anonymous stalker that ruined the lives of multiple teenagers. And yes, there are going to be a lot of spoilers in this, so if you want to watch the documentary, do that first. But before we dive into today's topic, I just want to speak to you about today's sponsor, and that is Aura. Now, if you've been around on this channel for quite a long time now, you will know that me and Aura go hand in hand, and that's because we've worked together multiple times, and that all comes down to the fact that I trust Aura completely. I'd recommend them to a family member, a friend, and in fact, that's kind of why I actually want to work with Aura, because, you know, with my family friends, I want to keep them safe, and sometimes, you know, you'll Google a family member or a friend, and you'll discover that there is an alarming amount of personal information out there readily available, and this information is very sensitive and could be used for malicious purposes. I'm talking phone numbers, past addresses, details you would never expect to be public, and it's just in general really unsettling to realize that basically anyone can access this. And well, that's where Aura comes into things. Because you see, Aura is an all-in-one digital security solution that helps protect your personal information. Yes, Aura is going to keep you safe. For example, their powerful data broker opt-out tool removes your data from people's search sites and data brokers, places that sell your information to scammers, identity thieves, and more. But Aura doesn't just stop there, because they also provide identity theft protection by monitoring your personal data, like your social security number, across billions of data points, including the dark web and public records. And if anything suspicious comes up, Aura will alert you straight away. But my friends, it doesn't end there. Because every single adult on your account, up to 5 adults I should say, get up to $1 million in identity theft insurance, with a total of up to $5 million in coverage to help with eligible losses and fees. But then the wonderful deal doesn't even end there, because Aura also includes a VPN, antivirus protection, a password manager, and 24/7 US-based customer support, all bundled into one affordable package. It's basically just a security empire in the palm of your hands. And I know that I'm not leaving myself and my family exposed to data breaches, and you should not either. Head to aura.com/inabber to try Aura for free for 2 weeks, and that is plenty of time to see if any of your personal data has already been compromised. Stay safe online with Aura, and I've worked with them multiple times. I trust them, I use Aura, and yeah, it's a great product, and I highly recommend it. And yes, big thank you to Aura for sponsoring this video, but with that, let's get back into things. Now, I think the best place to start this video would be to go through the timeline of events that transpired between 2020 and 2022 in this storyline. And no, I'm not just going to be retelling the Netflix script. I'm going to be going through the real, authentic story. I'm going to be going through details that Netflix missed out in their documentary. And whilst all of this will be similar to the Netflix documentary, I'm going to be going through all of this so we can stop, take a pause, and go through certain pieces of information and details that were left out in the documentary. And then after that, I want to go through the aftermath, court proceedings, the culprit in particular. I want to look into them and why they did the things that they did. So there's plenty of things. We're going to get into all of it. It's going to be messy, but yes, let's start with the main story. And yes, spoilers. Now meet Kendra and Sean Licari, who I would consider 2 out of 4 of the main people in this story. They are a husband and wife duo, or were a husband and wife duo, because if you've watched the documentary, you know what happens. But yes, these two met while studying at Central Michigan University, and they eventually moved to Beale City, where in 2002, they together had a daughter called Lauryn Licari. Now, if you're not from the States, Beale City probably sounds like a place which has a very large population, which is a big sprawling metropolis, possibly. But no, Beale City has a population of around 312 individuals. It is a very, very small part of America, and it's basically one of those communities you'll see in like a Netflix show based in the 1980s where everyone knows each other. It's like the most stereotypical American place that you'll see in a movie when you're a kid, or, I don't know, in Stranger Things. A quote from the news site The Cut says that Beale City is a farming community with 2 pubs and 1 flashing intersection, and it seemed that the last place on Earth anyone could hide. The landscape is open and flat, broken into well-tended fields and dairies, wind turbines churning overhead. Many of its families boast roots that stretch back generations. It's a place where, as one local said, you want to be received as a good person. When a parent is diagnosed with cancer, you start a meal train and sell t-shirts that says nobody fights alone. You volunteer to ladle cheese onto nachos at the stadium concessions, do help the sports boosters, and send your kid to practice with extra cleats for the boy who needs some. The heart of the town is its prized public school, a single brown-bricked complex K-12 with just 50 students per grade, a foyer decked in sports championships trophies, and a mural chirping, "Character counts." Basically, yeah, it's one of those very traditional American towns. The ones you see when you're, I don't know, if you're from Europe or from the UK, and you know when you used to watch movies from America, those really cheesy ones, and you know, you see it and you're like, wow, America is this amazing, wonderful place. I want to move there when I'm older. Everyone knows each other in this town. Everyone knows each other's last names. It's wonderful. And then you grow up and you and then you realize that America is, well, America. But yes, Kendra, Lauryn, and Sean, they seemed to be living the stereotypical American life. They were a loving family living in a small rural town where really nothing could ever go wrong. And if you think that's where the story starts to go downhill, actually no, because things really only started to progress for the Licari family after this. Because yes, love was in the air. And this is where we introduce the final main character in the story, Owen McKenny, who was Lauryn's childhood sweetheart. Yes, at 13 years old, these two were in a relationship. It seemed very sweet, very wholesome, and given how small the town was, it very much did seem that these two were the talk of the town. Everyone saw this real sweet little couple. I think we've all witnessed like a niece or a nephew, you know, go into a relationship, and you can't help but smile because it's pretty sweet to witness, you know, a little young couple together doing little young couple child things. You know, it's sweet, it's nice, and it's completely just nice to see, you know? And it even got to the point of where apparently these two were so sweet together that apparently other students in their school were apparently jealous of their relationship because they couldn't have what they had at 13 years old. And yes, obviously, most child relationships don't last forever. Even if they begin for like 2 or 3 years, most people know that when you start to get a little bit older, you start to become an adult, you know, you may grow out of each other and you may move on in most cases, but it did seem that at this point of time, in around 2020, the Licari family weren't financially rich. Some of them were working multiple jobs. The mother in particular had 2 jobs, but they were rich in terms of they had each other. It was a very, very wholesome thing going on here. The families of Owen and Lauryn knew each other. They got on. They hung out together. It was a really sweet and wholesome time, seemingly. And their relationship started off in typical kids fashion. Owen said that after his football game, he texted Lauryn that day saying, "So are we dating?" And she said, "I don't know. Do you want to be?" And he said, "I'm like, sure." I mean, it's very sweet, isn't it? It's very kiddie, isn't it? Like, obviously, it's not an adult relationship. They're just 2 sweet kids being kids. But now, actually talking specifically about the kids here, Lauryn was actually a bit of a quiet child. She seemingly didn't really want to be the center of attention just based on everything that I've read. It seemed that she was quite shy. It seemed that she was somebody that really kind of kept herself to herself. Like, yeah, she had friends, she had people that she spoke to, but it really did kind of feel that she was just with Owen most of the time. These two were pretty inseparable, and she was just very shy outside of that, based on what I've read. But then we need to point attention to the mother here, Kendra Licari, because you see, this is a completely different story, as Kendra was seen as the cool mum. And this is something that the Netflix documentary really didn't seem to go into detail much on basically at all, because Kendra was the cool mum. And I think we all know what a cool mum is. You know, you go to your friends on the weekends, you hang out there, maybe you sleep over, the mum gets pizza out, she lets you stay up for very late, and, you know, you play video games, and she's totally cool with that, you know, but you know, maybe on the side there might be some issues going on which have pushed her into being the cool mum and playing out for, you know, child validity. Obviously, there's nothing directly sinister about being the cool mum. But, you know, I remember being a kid and I remember seeing friends of cool mums and realizing, oh, maybe they're a little bit lonely, maybe they're a little bit bored, something on those lines. Never really ever anything sinister, but sometimes there's always a bigger story to explain why they are in the way they are. Usually they're just positive stories, of course. Maybe they're just really nice, but sometimes there's a bit of a twist. And you see, Kendra was somebody that was a bit more than the cool mom. She was actually a big figure in the community. Even with the kids, apparently, she used to approach the students at school events and gossip with them, which again, really isn't spoken about much at all in the Netflix documentary. But it also did seem that she was very proud of her daughter. She'd even apparently brag about her daughter so much that the parents would find it annoying. But I don't think the annoyance just came down to the fact that she was very proud of her child, but I think a big factor could also come down to the fact that while Kendra was arguably unreasonably involved in her child's private life. And I know some will say, you know, parents have the full right to be involved in every detail in their child's life. I actually personally believe children should have the right to privacy to obviously a certain extent, but I think they should be allowed to keep secrets. I think they should be able to live a life as a kid where their mother or father isn't looking down on everything they do 24/7. But Kendra was very much involved with everything, not just Lauryn was doing, but seemingly Lauryn's boyfriend, Owen, was also doing. As yes, according to one parent in the community, when Lauryn started dating Owen, her mother came along to basically every single time Lauryn and Owen hung out. At every opportunity, Kendra would ask them to wrap their arms around each other for a photo, which Lauryn would, innocently then turn into presents for Owen, like a personalized phone case, but it would only continue when they hung out with the Licaris. Kendra would chime in, being like, why don't you jump on the trampoline and take a spin in Lauryn's Ranger utility vehicle? Another parent said that Kendra would talk about these two like they were going to be together forever, and now you could say that this was all very innocent. She was just happy for her child for, being happy. But the next thing kind of suggests otherwise. As one parent claims, they saw Kendra take Lauryn's phone and actually wrote out a text and directly sent it to Owen that said, "I love you." Now, I may be misremembering things here, but I feel like all of these details really were not mentioned in the Netflix documentary. In fact, I can't remember the "I love you" text being mentioned at all, and I think it definitely does paint a bit of a creepy picture surrounding the mother in this situation. Because even if this was just, face value, no other history happened after this, I think just the behavior that she's displaying here is pushing way too many boundaries. Picking up your daughter's phone, your young daughter, or your daughter's phone in general at any age, and texting the boyfriend, "I love you," is an incredibly weird thing to do, and definitely a complete breach of personal boundaries. And I think in particular, when a child is 13 years old, and they're probably not saying the big "I love you" to each other, I think this is definitely an even worse thing you could do than at any other age range. Because for all we know, Kendra might have stole that moment from Owen and Lauryn. By sending that text, Owen now thinks that Lauryn has, professed her love to him. And actually, it was the mother supposedly sending this text message, which obviously is incredibly strange and starts to paint the picture of, well, maybe the parents weren't just annoyed at this mother for bragging about her daughter, and maybe they were starting to get a little bit concerned that, well, this mother, Kendra, was going a little bit too far when it came to being involved in these teenagers' lives. And this will start to lead us into this kind of creepy connection that the mother had with Owen in this story, the boyfriend of her own daughter. And again, as far as I know, this was not mentioned in the Netflix documentary. It was hinted at parts towards the ending of when Owen speaks about the mother and was saying that, she was very close with him, but I don't think they went into the necessary detail required to truly display how horrifying this story really is. Because continuing on, Kendra's attachment to Owen was very strong from quite early on. For example, when Owen was in the 8th grade, Kendra decided to sign up to be Owen's track coach, his personal track coach. Now, I may be reaching here, but personally, based on everything we've heard too far, I feel like it's very clear that this mother is getting way too close to this child who realistically, she doesn't have any reason to be this close to. If anyone from the personal life of Owen was going to be his personal coach, I think it should be a family member or a teacher. Owen even went on to claim in the future that they were so close that Kendra basically became a second mother to him. And this relationship between Owen and Kendra just progressively got more and more closer. For example, Kendra was a regular spectator at Owen's matches. At one time, she drove Lauryn 3 hours across Michigan to watch one of the championship games that Owen was performing in, and once Kendra even suggested turning one of Owen's tournaments into a Florida Licari family vacation trip. To which the mother, Jill, just basically denied that and was like, no, we're not going to do that. This is just going to be Owen's tournament. He's going to go, he's going to perform, and he's going to come home. And yes, that was not thankfully allowed to happen, but I think it does very much represent how close Kendra was trying to get to Owen, who, bearing in mind, was between the ages of 13 and 14 years old at that period of time. And you know, at the face of it, you could maybe suggest that, well, this was a very protective mother of her daughter, and she just really wanted to support her daughter, and by extension, that came supporting Owen. But personally, I don't agree with that. I think that Kendra's relationship, not just with Owen, but in general with a lot of the school kids at the school that Owen and Lauryn went to, was incredibly inappropriate. We've seen reports that Kendra has gossiped with other students at this school, and then we found out that she supposedly sent a text message saying "I love you" to Owen from Lauryn without Lauryn even knowing about this. And obviously she's got this strong growing connection with Owen where she's doing so many things for him, which honestly I just don't think is normal behavior for a boyfriend to have the mother of their girlfriend doing to them at 13 years old. When I was around 14 years old and in my first relationship, I think the furthest thing that my girlfriend at the time's dad did for me is he took me home, you know, after hanging out with my girlfriend that day. That was the really the furthest it went, because obviously, you have to acknowledge that these are child relationships. They're not serious. They're just very wholesome things. And if anything, they're just more like advanced friendships at that period of time. And yes, as they get older, it might get more serious. But as a parent, you have the responsibility to just acknowledge the fact that these two are still kids and you should allow them to be kids. You shouldn't try and become the parent of your child's 13 or 14-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend. You should just let them do what they're doing. Obviously, you can parent and, you know, establish boundaries, but it was very clear that there were no boundaries for Kendra Licari, even to a point of where the other mother had to come into this story and actually establish boundaries, saying, hey, you're not going to go on vacation with my child. And this is where the story then starts to get extremely dark. Because if you've watched the Netflix documentary, you will know that during all of this, there was an incredibly sinister storyline taking place throughout the relationship of Owen and Lauryn. And I'm just going to jump ahead and now show you this court document here, which is between Sheriff Michael Maine and defendant Kendra Licari for a count of stalking a minor, a count of communicating with another to commit a crime via computers and the internet, a count again of stalking a minor, another count of using computers, the internet to communicate with another to commit a crime, and one count of an obstruction of justice. And yes, if you've not watched the Netflix documentary, you may be very confused where this twist came from, because yes, I did not mention any of this up until this point, but I've done that for good reason, because I wanted to present the fact that, well, Kendra, regardless of this dark story of what we're about to get into, was very inappropriate, not just with Owen, but with other students as well. She was gossiping with students, and more importantly with Owen, establishing a very personal, inappropriate connection. But now, on top of that, take into the fact that yes, all of these criminal counts were alleged against her. And in my opinion, Netflix did not establish the raw, full details about the inappropriate connection between Kendra and Owen well enough. I don't think they went into even remotely close enough detail that they should have in a documentary which goes into the details that we're about to go into. And that's why I think it's incredibly important to speak about Owen's story before we go into everyone else's story. Because I'm going to say it before I go any further, but I genuinely believe that Owen has been completely let down in this Netflix documentary. Because what you're going to discover is Owen is absolutely a victim in this story. And whilst I don't think many people out there deny that or didn't think that coming out of the documentary, I think there are a lot of details in the Netflix documentary that were not highlighted on enough, but more importantly, not taken seriously enough. And yes, we're going to get into that now by going into the darker aspect of this story. And it all starts in September of 2020, when Lauryn was apparently planning on going to a Halloween party that originally, according to Kendra, she was not invited to, but Owen had asked to come with her. At first, it really did feel like a very innocent thing. Lauryn had not been invited to this party, and Owen wanted his girlfriend to come along with him. He's proud of her, he's her closest friend, and he just wants her to be there with her. Now, I should just say, as we'll get into later on in this story, there has actually been dispute to the claim made in the Netflix documentary that Lauryn was not invited. Some claims have been made that Lauryn actually was not originally invited, but when the mother of the person hosting the party found out that Lauryn wasn't invited, she then apparently promptly invited Lauryn. But Kendra, the mother of Lauryn, claims that Lauryn was not invited. And I should just say that Lauryn's mother's storyline definitely benefits her purpose more than everyone else's purpose and argument in this entire story, and you will find out why. Because yes, the night Lauryn found out she was going to the party, she received this text message right here from an unknown number that read, "It is obvious he wants me. His attention is constantly on me. Not sure what he told you, but he is coming to the Halloween party, and we are both DTF down to," and yeah, I don't think I need to go further. And then another one came saying, "He wants nothing to do with you. He thinks you're annoying and an ugly ass bitch, and wishes you would leave him the alone. Why do you think he is on the phone all the time texting me? You didn't get invited to sleep with him. I did. I'm spending the night with him. I'm sharing a bed with him, not you." Now, yes, these are very vile texts to send to anyone, but in particular, they're incredibly vile to send to a 13-year-old on an unknown number. And at the time of when these texts were being sent, no one had any idea who sent the text. There were a lot of theories. A lot of people out there pointed at a lot of people that we'll go into later, stating that this person didn't want Lauryn at the party. She wasn't originally invited, and this is some of the mean girls in this small community just bullying and being nasty to Lauryn because they did not want her at the party, but they wanted Owen at the party because they had a little crush on Owen and they couldn't get to him because of Lauryn. And now, obviously, if you've seen the story or if you've seen the court documents, you will immediately go and think, okay, this was the mother sending these messages. Because yes, I've shown you now that yes, the mother has been caught stalking multiple people in the story. But no, the mother in the Netflix documentary outright denies that she sent these text messages. This was not her personal case of stalking, and her personal case only comes after this. Because yes, whilst these texts were very vulgar and abusive and were cases of harassment, these texts only lasted a very small period of time. In fact, after a while, these texts completely ceased and didn't actually continue for another 11 months. Because yes, late 2021 is when things really started to get serious. And funnily enough, it does actually appear that the court system does agree that the stalking previously at the Halloween party event was not actually the mother, because when you look into the court documents in the case surrounding Kendra Licari, it states that the stalking period was between September the 13th, 2021 to February the 28th, 2022. The mother claims it wasn't her, and it very much seems that the court seems to at least believe her, and they only believe that the next part of the story was all Kendra. Because yes, in late 2021, Lauryn randomly received a text from an unknown number once again. It seemed that the person from 2020 had finally returned after 11 months. And these texts read, "Hi Lauryn, Owen is breaking up with you. He no longer likes you and hasn't liked you for a while. It's over, he wants me." Now I know the court documents deny that this was the person from previously, but these texts read, in my personal opinion, very similar to the texts that were sent in 2020. In my opinion, I really doubt that this is anyone else other than the previous individual. I just can't see a coincidence in someone doing what they did previously and then a copycat identically copying what they were doing before. In my opinion, it makes no sense, and this is where I'm now going to reveal the full story, because yes, you know that Kendra Licari was involved in a stalking case during the relationship of Owen and Lauryn, but that all came from the fact that, well, for around a year straight, Kendra was sending horrific text messages to not just Owen and Lauryn, but multiple members of the community. For a year, Kendra made it her mission to ruin the lives of multiple teenagers, but in particular, her daughter. This woman created multiple accounts, multiple phone numbers, multiple personas, tried to frame multiple people in an effort to ruin her own daughter, Lauryn's life. And yes, I know, it was pretty obvious with the court documents that are revealed, or you've just watched the documentary already, but yes, this woman had been going, honestly, the only way to put it, outright insane behind the scenes. And I will just say that this is definitely one of the most evil things I think I've ever witnessed a mother do. And honestly, I cover a lot of crazy mums. I've covered crazy dads in the past, but in terms of crazy mothers on TikTok, for example, I've seen so many bad cases. But this is a whole new level. This is one of the most insane things I think I've ever witnessed. And what you're seeing here is a compilation of just a few texts that were sent to Lauryn by her own mother via a fake unknown profile. And from the very beginning, most of these texts would be deliberately targeting Lauryn for things that she was insecure surrounding, such as her appearance or just how she was as a human being. And these messages at first were, immediately abusive. They were immediately horrible, and they were immediately just designed to make Lauryn feel miserable, in my personal opinion. But what you're going to notice throughout these messages is they progressively get worse and worse. And I really don't think Netflix focus on this enough. I don't think they focus on the fact that when Kendra was sending these messages, she was getting to a point of where you start to get worried that these messages are just the beginning, and this could lead to real life harm happening to Owen and Lauryn if it was not dealt with in time. Because these messages were getting dark. It would go from when Lauryn wore Owen's jersey, she would receive a text saying, "WTF, you need to take that off, you are embarrassing him," to "you suck at basketball, he ain't dating no suck ass not good enough JV girl," to weird messages stating how Owen's life would be better if Lauryn was dead. But then she actually took that message back, stating that she went too far. Now, this is something that I, again, feel like Netflix don't really focus in on enough, because to me personally, that message doesn't read like a jealous bully student trying to ruin this person's life. in my opinion, now given, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but knowing that the mother sent this text, I think what you have here is a mother who clearly regrets what they sent. They knew that they had gone too far, and that's why they took back the message. Personally, I don't think that a 14-year-old cyberbully would have that level of remorse or that realization of, oh, I've gone too far. But then it gets even weirder when that level of remorse over time starts to completely vanish. Because at first it was just, your regularly abusive messages, but then towards later on in the timeline, things got worse and worse. Because as you can see in this message here, she texted a very similar message than before, but there was no taking it back, there was no remorse, and there was no holding back how far this had gone. This woman was now outright trying to not just ruin her daughter's life, but she was clearly trying to take her life away. And these weren't just texts of, once or twice every day or once every few days. No, it got to a point of where Lauryn's mother was sending these text messages to her 40 to 50 times a day. This is how bad it was getting. And again, I don't think Netflix focused enough on the fact that, Lauryn's mother was prompting her daughter into doing the worst possible thing. And I also don't think, as you will see later on from the court documents, that the court did enough to address the fact that, her mother was trying to, basically get rid of her own daughter. But even after this, the text then went into more illegal territories to the point of where this was no longer just harassment. Like, these texts here were referring to Lauryn's 14-year-old boyfriend, Owen, in very, very explicit and disturbing ways. And I can't really go into detail in reading what these screenshots say, but as you can see, even with the screenshots being a bit censored, it was very clear that Kendra was going into explicit detail on what she wanted to do with Owen. And that's why I think it's very, very insane that Netflix did not go much into detail about Owen and Kendra's connection and relationship. They should have gone into the detail of everything Kendra was doing with Owen during the relationship of Lauryn and Owen, but they basically just fleetingly mentioned it and never really addressed it again. They just presented it as, Kendra was basically a second mother to Owen and nobody suspected her. And whilst it's true that, no one really did suspect her, I know there have been allegations that some people out there did, but ultimately the FBI, the police, all the investigators who were trying to find out was sending these messages, they did not suspect the mother at first. And I think because of that, Netflix should have focused on the mother's inappropriate relationship with Owen, because whilst, this documentary, I don't doubt, is created for entertainment purposes, I think prevention is a very important thing. And I think that's what these documentaries should be aiming to do. And discussing inappropriate breaches of boundaries between an adult and a child is very important in these situations, because if we don't address that, it could possibly lead to things like this. And look, I'm not trying to say that somebody being the cool mum leads to this in every single situation. In fact, I'm not saying that in basically any of these situations, but I think with Kendra, the cool mum aesthetic very much became something more than that. She was close with the children at this school. She conversed with the children at this school. And as you'll go on to discover, she had the phone numbers of the children at this school. And I think it would be incredibly important for Netflix to address these facts, go over the relationship to prevent these things from happening in the future. But they really don't go into detail whatsoever. And when I first watched this documentary, I immediately jumped onto my Instagram story and I was absolutely angry at one particular thing that was not mentioned throughout any of the documentary. And that is, in my personal opinion, Kendra, in my opinion, is a predator? Look at these text messages. Tell me that this being sent from a grown woman, a mother, to a daughter's boyfriend who is 14 years old, tell me that this is not predatory behavior. We have seen so many similar situations on the internet in cases like this, where somebody is sending these similar type of texts to somebody underage, and we immediately dub them as a predator. But for some reason, with Kendra Licari, this was not mentioned throughout any of the documentary. They mentioned the inappropriate messages, but they never went into detail behind how truly sickening these messages are. But what makes this even more insane, that's something I've left out throughout all of this video so far, is that, well, Kendra featured in this Netflix documentary. But she didn't just feature in this documentary, but she even reenacted the messages that she sent out to her own daughter. And I should just say the inappropriate messages about Owen were directly sent to Lauryn, but like that changes anything, she's still basically fantasizing. It's weird to say. It's just weird to say. And Netflix allowed her in this documentary. I don't want to be that guy, because I feel like everyone says it in basically every situation like this, but I can't help but feel if this was a 45-year-old man sending these types of messages to a 13-year-old girl, I feel like we would be dealing with a very different story. It's basically that scene from South Park. You know when Kyle goes to the police station to report the fact that, well, his teacher is having an incredibly inappropriate relationship or interaction with his little brother, and the police immediately get up. They're angry. They're devastated. They're asking for his name. They're asking for his name, i.e. the man that did what Kyle is suggesting. But when Kyle tells them it's not a man and it's actually the story between a woman and a little boy, well, their reaction immediately changes.
Nice.
What?
Now, I'm not saying that Netflix have directly done what South Park was showing there, but I think it is a bit of a representation of how we treat these types of situations and cases. How is this woman featuring in this documentary when she has sent these types of messages to a minor? It is genuine, pure, utter insanity, and I don't understand it. I know Netflix can't legally call her a predator, but they should at least go over the fact that these messages are extremely predatory, they're extremely creepy, and they should at least actually challenge her on these messages. But no, they just allow her to sit there and tell her story, which as we go further through this video, you're going to understand gets more and more insane as we go more in detail on that. And yes, not just Kendra was interviewed in this documentary, also the entire family was, Lauryn was, the father was, Owen was. But I think even that in itself is a bit of a problem, because this story did not take place that long ago, and the children in this story are still children to this day. And I don't know if I'm being that one friend who's too woke, but I just don't believe that Lauryn or Owen should have been put in the position where they're going on to a Netflix documentary to already speak about this. This court case took place in 2022, and as you're going to discover, the effects of that court case are still taking place to this day, which we'll go into later on. And throughout the documentary, the daughter in particular basically looks absolutely terrified, and that's probably down to the fact that, well, the mother is featuring in this documentary. She is also talking about these incredibly traumatic things, and this information is going to go out there to millions of people that are going to scrutinize her and criticize her, because basically this entire documentary is hardly even centered around the daughter, and is actually Kendra Licari basically being the center point of everything, which kind of makes sense because, you know, she is the main person in the story. She was the one sending out the messages. But at the end of the day, I don't think that that is appropriate given what was in those messages. I don't think she should have been able to be the center point of this story, but Netflix allowed Kendra to basically take control and lead the conversation, and no wonder the daughter looks so worried and so scared during this story, because of what the mother has done in the past and now what she is doing in the present. But moving on further down the timeline in this story, with the text messages getting worse and worse, naturally, as I mentioned earlier, the police and investigators were called. And yes, that does mean that Lauryn's mother was basically self-reporting, and this wasn't because she wanted to be caught and they wanted somebody just to stop her and she just couldn't help herself, so she tried to get the police to prevent that from happening anymore. No, it was very clear that Kendra was trying to cover her tracks. And with that, allow me to introduce you another person in this story, and that is Chloe Wilson. Now, Chloe, in my opinion, is quite interesting because Chloe is the same ages as Owen and Lauryn. But I've seen online, this person has received a lot of hate and abuse and criticism, and that's all down to the fact that, well, this Netflix documentary frames Chloe as a bully. They interview people, and yes, they confirm that Chloe did bully people whilst in school. But personally, again, I don't know if I'm being too woke here, I don't think it's fair to put a 14-year-old on blast like this to millions of people, letting everyone know that, oh, she was a bully and we're not even going to contest that. Netflix just allow everyone in this show to say that, yeah, Chloe was a bully while she was in school, and now there is context to why they say this. But personally, whilst, you could be critical of this 14-year-old, I just don't really think it's fair for her to be put on blast in this Netflix documentary like this. I feel like every child in this story is not being protected enough, and again, there is context to why they mention the bullying aspect, but personally, I just feel that Netflix did not do enough to protect Chloe in this story, because I have seen so many people attack this girl because she was a bully in school, and I'm not saying bullying is right, but honestly, I feel like a lot of people need to just accept that yes, 14-year-olds can be little. They can be the little gremlins that need to be told off and stopped, but that's not up to you, a 25-year-old freak on the internet who thinks, oh, I need to go send this teenager loads of horrific messages. How dare you bully this kid in school whilst you were in school? It's like, no, I don't think we should be doing that. And yes, again, there's context here, but I just felt like I needed to say that I just think this kid is being unfairly treated right now, and I don't think Netflix did enough to protect this kid. Yes, I don't agree with bullying, but at the end of the day, I also don't agree with fully grown adults bullying a teenager who they don't even know. Now again, maybe I am being that friend again who, is too woke, but I just personally had a lot of issues with this part of the story, and admittedly at first I thought, okay, she clearly is a bully, she clearly is a bit of a, but like at the end of the day, I don't know this girl, she's 14 years old, kids can grow, they can change, and they have made mistakes, and that's fine, but it should just end there. It should just end there, and with that, we are going to end that conversation and go into the context behind why we even know that this person was a bully, because yes, Kendra, as we know, knew all of the children in this town. She knew everything about them, and she decided, because of this whole bully aspect, she was going to pin the blame of these text messages on Chloe. Because you see, when Kendra was trying to supposedly find out who the harasser was, she said that she was growing suspicious of Chloe because in some of the messages sent to Lauryn and Owen, the word bruh was used multiple times, and this is suspicious because Chloe also regularly uses the word bruh. Now, I personally think that this is one of the more insane aspects of this story because I feel like every single teenager in America uses the phrase bruh. It literally is just like, oh, bruh, I can't believe this. Oh, bro. It's just another version of saying, bro, I can't believe what you do. Like something like that, But she was so desperate to pin this on somebody else, a 14-year-old girl, may I add, that she took this and ran with it and started to pin this campaign of harassment on to Chloe. And yes, I personally think it's a little bit wild that no one saw this and thought, Kendra, maybe you're going a bit too far with this. Now, I should just go back to something I mentioned earlier, though, that some people apparently did begin to suspect Kendra during this investigation, in particular high school staff and Chloe's mum. This article here says, whilst the documentary opted for a more dramatic reveal when Kendra turned out to be the culprit, in reality, many of the parents and high school staff said they thought it was Kendra all along. Principal Boyer noted in the cut that he found it odd that Kendra had 2 phones and seemed to be looking on her devices more than at other people. Meanwhile, her secretary, Diane Fussman, allegedly confided in him that she was suspicious about Kendra as well. I always thought she was a little bit obsessive with her child, Fussman told the outlet. My gut told me that this isn't just one of our kids. In addition to the staff, several parents were curious about Kendra because she seemed to be getting a fair amount of attention from the whole ordeal. Chloe's mum in particular, Tammy, specifically called out Kendra after her daughter had been investigated, as in when Chloe had been investigated. She pointed to the Halloween party drama and the history between their daughters and past behavior from Kendra. She reportedly told the police at the time, I don't know if you know Kendra or not, but you really need to be cautious. There is a pretty good part of me that thinks she may very well be doing this. So yes, at least the mother after this part of the situation clocked on that Kendra is being very weird. And it does start to bring up more questions of why it took so long for this case to be solved, because in my opinion, when you look at all of the information and stuff that we've gone through that wasn't necessarily gone in detail in the Netflix documentary, it does very much point towards the fact that yes, this is Kendra doing this, and maybe people didn't want to look at that because it's such an insane plot twist, but at the end of the day, there is just so much weird stuff coming from Kendra even early on in this story. But another reason to why Kendra claimed that she was suspicious of Chloe was because in the text sent to Lauryn, the individual claimed that apparently the police were defending them, and coincidentally Chloe's dad was also a police sergeant, and then there were more suspicions that came after that, because also Kendra alleged the fact that Lauryn's Snapchat account was hacked, and then the account popped back up in the town where Chloe lived. And yeah, I can kind of understand why the parents would buy into this story, because yes, maybe they did see that Chloe was a bully, and maybe they thought, oh, she's trying to bully Owen. There is a bit of a history between Owen and Chloe, or at least there's a connection of some form there, maybe. And maybe that's why they were buying into that. And I guess that's why Kendra really thought that Chloe is the person to pin this on. And another point of suspicion that came from all of this that really did point to Chloe was the fact that in one of the messages sent to Lauryn, apparently the anonymous person brags about getting 12 points in a basketball game at school. And yes, you guessed it. In that same game, Chloe was the only person to score 12 points. But I'm not gonna lie to you, as much as I can kind of get why the parents kind of looked at Chloe and thought, okay, this is probably Chloe, it just doesn't make any sense. From the bra stuff to the basketball stuff, in my personal opinion, it doesn't make sense, because why would she self-report like this? Some could say, oh, it's a 14-year-old being stupid and silly and wanting to brag, but at the end of the day, from what we've seen in this story, we have somebody that knows how to use technology to a point of creating multiple accounts, multiple unknown numbers, and get away with this for so long. I just feel that if someone was going to these lengths, they wouldn't just randomly admit to it being them. Because in this 12-point admission, they are effectively saying, hey, I'm Chloe, it's me. And in my opinion, based on a year of this going on now, that just wouldn't make any sense. The texts we've seen are vile. They are criminal. This is harassment. Why would they admit to criminal allegations which would get them sent to juvenile hall? But also another thing to take into context here with this technological stuff is the fact that Kendra had a job in an IT role at the university nearby. So it's clear she would know how to do all of these things in terms of creating a fake profile, spoofing her phone number, possibly using other forms of technology strategy to try and cover her tracks and get away with these things. Things that really I don't think the average 14-year-old knows how to do, whereas Kendra clearly had the background. And when you start to really think about things and add all the details in, it does start to directly push towards her. But at this point of time, she wasn't obviously a massive suspect. To be honest, she wasn't really a suspect at all, other than what Chloe's mum said. And yeah, it led to the police unfortunately interviewing Chloe. They confiscated her phone, they searched it, and they went through Owen's phone as well. And guess what? They found nothing. Well, nothing related to Chloe at least, because on Owen's phone, they did find a Snapchat conversation with a profile called Chloe, but they did discover that this Chloe profile was pretending to be Chloe but had no affiliation with her whatsoever, no IP attached to her. It definitely was not her account, and it was clear to the police that someone was pinning all of this on a 14-year-old girl. And I've seen a lot of people out there, as I said before, hate on Chloe, but I will not do that in this situation. In my opinion, Chloe is also a victim in this story, and she could have absolutely had her life ruined by Kendra Licari. And again, I feel like this is a part of the Netflix documentary that is not focused on enough. Yes, of course they address all of this part of the story because it is a big part, but I don't think they really address that Kendra could have ruined a 14-year-old's life on top of a bunch of other 14-year-olds' lives. She was vicious, and yet they allowed her, again, to feature in this documentary and reenact the messages that she sent out. I think that this is absolute pure insanity. This woman should not be allowed to have this platform. I know it makes it more interesting to see her speak like this, but realistically, this is a dangerous, insane woman that should not have been given this opportunity. She has multiple counts of trying to destroy people's lives and get away with it. And from this point, the messages only progressively got worse and more dark. In one message it said, his life would be better if you were dead, in reference to Owen. And in another message, they directly tell Lauryn to take her own before we do. And again, another thing that I don't think Netflix touched on here is the fact that, well, if this wasn't prevented, if the police did not eventually find out who was behind all of this, this could have gotten to a point of where this kid would no longer be with us, where Lauryn would unfortunately go through with everything. Because something that I haven't actually confirmed so far is that, well, during all of this, the relationship of Owen and Lauryn came to an end after Lauryn and Owen came to the conclusion that maybe if they just broke up, like this anonymous person has been demanding for so long, it would bring an end to this harassment campaign. But it didn't. It did not end. And I think what makes this even more wild is Netflix don't address this. They don't focus on the fact that this continued after they broke up. And in my opinion, if the police didn't catch Kendra, because they do eventually, I will spoil that, they do eventually catch her, I think this could have gotten to a really, really terrible spot. And Netflix don't really address this. They don't really go into detail, and they don't speak about this. And I think this is a very, very crucial thing. But another crucial thing is the fact that, well, the involvement with Owen didn't end when their relationship ended. Because Owen eventually did move on, and he did find a new girlfriend. And what happened in that new relationship is, well, the messages begun again. Owen's new girlfriend started receiving abusive messages, harassment constantly, just as familiar as the ones being sent to Lauryn, and all of these messages were surrounding Owen. The person sending the messages was clearly hyper obsessed with Owen. They wanted to be in Owen's life in the most sinister way you can possibly imagine. And yes, it was Kendra sending these messages the whole time. And I will pause there. I will take a pause there because I want to go more in detail on that later on. but now we just need to quickly get to the ending point of this story, of where eventually, yes, Kendra was caught. Because yes, the sheriff eventually reached out to the FBI for assistance in this case, and federal authorities linked Isabel County investigators with a cybercrimes expert with the Bay City Police Department. Now, this isn't a criticism of Netflix here, this is more a criticism of the people investigating this case, but I was particularly confused because this whole case seemed to have been investigated for a very, very long time, and I understand that there were good intentions from the very get-go to find out who was committing all of these horrible acts, but I was really confused about why it took so long for a cybercrimes investigator to get involved in a case about cybercrimes. I don't know if anyone else was particularly confused by this, because it basically took them about 5 seconds after getting this expert involved to find out, oh yeah, the IP tracks to Kendra. It was Kendra the whole time. Yes, we did it in 5 seconds. Because yes, the cyber sleuths eventually connected the threatening text to an IP address from a Spectrum host from the Mount Pleasant area and a user who opens the link with an Apple iPhone, according to the report, and the only number that matched anyone involved with this case was Kendra. He found out that the Kendra phone number was attached to the IP address each time a text message was sent to the victims. When Maine and Detective Scott Clark confronted Kendra with the findings at her home, she insisted she hadn't sent the early text messages, but then she fed off it and began sending the new ones. And look, whilst this is the most insane and most disgusting thing that I think I've seen a mother do in a very, very long time in one of these documentaries, again, why did this take so long? I feel like there has been an absolute failure of justice in this situation that it took this long for a cybercrimes expert to get involved. We have just seen that there was no IP protection. There was no VPNs being used. She didn't use a YouTuber's, VPN code. She was doing this unprotected, and she could have been tracked at basically any moment of time, but it took so unbelievably long and allowed her to have months and months of harassment directed towards her daughter and multiple other teenagers. I was just very confused by all of this. I mean, the harassment was insane. She was making edits like this, hating on her own child's Instagram. What you're looking at here right now was something actually made by Kendra. And as you saw in the Netflix documentary, there were multiple examples of this, of her taking photos from Lauryn's Instagram and just hatefully editing them and sending them to Lauryn, just targeting her appearance, targeting so many things about her. And it's like, how did it take so long for a cybercrime expert to get involved? This woman, for over a year, ruined her children's lives and multiple other children's lives, and even tried to pin the blame on another child that she knew via calculated and manipulative methods. But the thing is it only gets even worse when you start to look into the personal life of Kendra and her family, because it very much did seem that this whole campaign against her own daughter actually just completely took over her life, to a point of where the family's finances took a monumental decline, and Kendra was lying to her own husband about her job. Because in an article from The Cut, they confirmed that Kendra had been lying about her job to her family for a year. She had been fired from Michigan University for her performance, and then at the spring of 2021, she was reported to have had performative issues, and a manager cited excessive time on texts and calls that were not related to work, and she eventually quit that job in August of that year and kept on lying to her family, claiming that she was working from home. And yes, she was working from home, ladies and gentlemen. She was working from home on a campaign to ruin her own daughter's life. This woman, I mean, I don't even think there's words we can put into context here to truly explain how insane and evil this individual is. And Netflix were like, you know what, Kendra? Do you want to feature on this documentary? Do you want to reenact everything that you did? And she sat down and she did all of it, and it's genuinely one of the weirdest things that I think I've ever seen. But aside from all the emotional damage that this woman has put onto so many people, I just want to focus on her husband Sean for a second. Now, I don't really speak about Sean Licari that much in this video, but this guy has also been impacted so unbelievably much by this woman. Of course, it's his ex-partner, so that's natural. But the financial aspect in particular is absolutely wild to think about. This woman for over a year lied about her employment status, and it caused their finances to absolutely plummet. In the documentary, they actually do show how much this man had lost, and he had basically lost everything that he had earned up until that point in his life. All of his personal belongings, they had to go. They lost their storage units because of their finances, and that's all because of Kendra Licari. But also think about the court costs and lawyers that came after this situation, everything that transpired, being a single parent after all of this. I just can't believe that Netflix were comfortable to allow this person to feature in a documentary that Sean and Lauryn and the others were all also featuring in. And yeah, this is where I want to get into the main problems and issues I have surrounding this documentary, because I know it seems a little bit harsh, but I personally believe that this is one of the more embarrassing documentaries that Netflix have released. Like, yes, it was well, put together. It kept me on my seat, and I put my phone down to watch the entire thing, which honestly is actually a bit of a credit to Netflix, because, I'm usually just scrolling whilst I watch things because I have a chronic social media addiction. But, on that side, everything was good. But on the actual side of making a productive story that gets the entire story out there and not allowing the main culprit in this story to defend themselves and get away with things, in my personal opinion, socially, they did a terrible job. And that mainly all comes down to, as I've mentioned, they allowed Kendra to defend herself in this documentary. Because yes, towards the ending of the documentary, they kind of ask her, well, why did you do this? What was the rationale behind your behavior? Because this isn't a normal case. This is a very unique case, and yeah, Kendra sat down and gave a sob story. Kendra's first claim was that she wanted to get down to the bottom of who sent the original messages surrounding the Halloween party in 2020, and that is what prompted her into messaging Lauryn and Owen in the first place in 2021. And Licari said that she first sent the messages with the hope that either of the teens would write back and discuss it among themselves. She theorized that if something happened, that something could possibly come up. And look, I think a big problem here comes from Netflix's actual documentary style, because Netflix will kind of do their documentaries in this way of where they will ask the person a question, but you won't really ever hear them ask the question. It will be more, they'll ask it silently, and then you'll just hear the answer directly from the person that they're speaking to. It's not like a Piers Morgan interview where you have an interviewer and interviewee. It's like you have a silent interviewer and then you have the person speaking. And the problem is with that, you never really see the person being interviewed challenged. You only get their perspective, and you only have details that get ignored. And usually in normal, non-serious documentaries about things that really don't matter or aren't that significant, where there aren't really any victims, I can understand that documentary style. It can be very compelling and make things a lot more interesting. You don't want an interviewer just yapping 24/7 like I do. But I feel like in a situation where there are real victims, in particular multiple child victims, I feel like there should be pushback. I feel like there should be a response to the defense that Kendra Licari was making. Such as if you were trying to really prompt them into, discussing who sent the original messages, why would your messages be, "Hi Lauryn, Owen is breaking up with you," and just putting direct worry and anxiety into your own child's mind? Now, obviously, Kendra may make the suggestion of, "Oh, I wanted to appear to be the person from 2020. But in my opinion, any sane, normal mother, I mean, nobody sane in this situation is going to be doing this, but if somebody was going to be doing this in some level of sane situation, I feel like they would be sending the text of, "Oh, I don't know, guess who's back?" But she didn't do that. She immediately jumped to, "I'm going to try and ruin my daughter's relationship," and she claims she's doing that to try and find out who sent messages. a year prior? I mean, it just really makes no sense. But Kendra's defense only continued after that, when she claimed that she also just began to spiral and the messages got out of control, and she tried to project her insecurities onto Lauryn as a way to take it out on her. And you may be as confused as I'm sounding right now, because in my opinion, none of this really makes any sense, because as we've seen in multiple messages, she tried to prompt her own daughter into doing the worst possible thing. She tried to get her daughter to do that, and that doesn't really reflect the whole insecurity argument that she was making. At Netflix, they just kind of sit there, and they're like, oh, yeah, talk, get your piece out there. And in fact, it gets to a point of where she actually says to the person interviewing her behind the camera, you probably think I'm insane. And what is actually insane is that you actually do hear someone for once behind the camera, and they basically just say, no, we don't think you're insane. And some maybe will say, oh, they're just doing it to get her to continue to speak and, get more of a story out there. But I'm sorry, but no, we're not going to do that. Because am I the only one going insane here? This woman sent explicit 18+ messages about what she wanted to do to her daughter's 13 to 14-year-old partner. She was hyper obsessed with this child. She would travel 3 hours across state to hang out with this kid. She would text him. She would harass him and harass his new partners after her daughter's relationship ended. And Netflix just sat there saying, oh no, you're not insane. No, she is insane. And even if you don't want to, admit to that to get her to continue to speak, just say nothing. Just allow her to continue to talk. But no, Netflix didn't do that. And in my opinion, it's just a complete injustice on the victims in this story. And again, I'm going to bring up these messages that I just mentioned, these explicit messages. Why were these really only referred to around one time in the documentary, fleetingly may I say as well, and it's just really never directly addressed ever again? Like, yeah, maybe they touch on it here and there, but they never directly say what I'm thinking of. Well, this woman is, in my humble opinion, a predator. I don't think anyone else would get away with this. So why is she? Why are Netflix allowed to platform this? It makes no sense. Now, she goes on to make further defenses, stating that she was in an awful place mentally, and she actually goes on to recount an awful thing that happened to her regarding an assault when she was 17 years old. And she basically stated that her daughter was getting to those teenage years, and she was scared that she was basically going to go through the same process that she did, and she didn't know how to handle these things. No, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that, my friend Kendra. We're not my friend, actually. You're not my friend. You're never going to be my friend or anything close to a friend with me. You're probably not going to have a friend in general, actually, because I don't think anyone is going to want to be friends with you after all of this. But no, Kendra, we're not going to do this. We are not going to use the horrible thing that happened to you as a way to excuse what you did. Because you didn't just project insecurities on your daughter. We have seen you try to convince your daughter to do the worst possible thing, and then add in the additional threat of, if she doesn't do that, then you will do that. And for all we know, it could have gotten to that point if the police did not catch you. But do Netflix speak about this? No, they just allow her to talk. But also, the main key thing regarding this argument from Kendra that Netflix just completely miss out is, she says that she did this as a way to protect her daughter. She didn't want what happened to her to happen to her daughter. Well, that doesn't really make any sense when you take into the context that she continued to text people in Owen's life after he had broken up with her daughter. She sent text messages to Owen's new girlfriend. If she was trying to protect her daughter, why would she continue to get involved in Owen's personal life? There is no justification, and this woman has used a very, very serious point of trauma as a way to excuse her horrible actions. And this gets into another main problem that I have with this documentary. Yes, it does shape Owen out to be a victim, but I don't think it focuses on this fact quite enough. This woman has hyper obsessed on this boy for so unbelievably long. She was doing things that were inappropriate before these messages even began, in my personal opinion, but she's also sent basically fan fiction to her own daughter about this boy, and then she has continued to try and ruin his life after their relationship even ended. And Netflix just allow her to say all of these things without really bringing up any of this information, and in my opinion, it has allowed this woman to put out a false narrative out there that isn't even true. They have allowed this woman, in my opinion, this predator, to come on their platform and defend herself. Do you understand how crazy that is? Multi-billion-dollar corporation Netflix have allowed that to happen. They basically ignored the fact that the mum would text Owen from her daughter's phone saying, "I love you." They barely touched on the fact that she signed up to be his track coach and would go to the point of traveling 3 hours to watch his game. She was obsessed with coming on all of their dates and being there no matter what. They could not get away with her. She was obsessed with Owen's love life. Even after Lauryn and Owen had broken up, she would ask Owen's mother if he was getting with Chloe. The documentary fails to go through any of this extensively, and they have let down a real victim in this story in the name of allowing the culprit and criminal in this story to actually defend themselves. Now, the creator of the documentary has came out in an interview stating that it was appealing to Kendra to sit down and tell her story from her perspective, and that Lauryn could see her do that, and she wanted to do it, I think, for her daughter. But in my opinion, either this guy is just saying that as an excuse to get away with this documentary, or he has just been completely manipulated by somebody who is blatantly a Class A manipulator. We have seen this woman try to pin everything in a very manipulative fashion on a 14-year-old girl, and now he is allowing her to get her redemption story by telling her story. I don't know why he's coming across shocked here, in my opinion, that it was appealing for Kendra to sit down on Netflix and tell her own version of events. Of course that would be appealing, because she knew that she could get onto a massive company's broadcasting platform and tell the world that she also is a victim in this story and allow her to get away with everything. But to be fair, the creator does genuinely seem to believe that the mother is coming on this whole thing for the daughter to kind of recoup some form of relationship with her. But in my opinion, even if we're looking at this from the most innocent perspective here, you have been manipulated, and you as a filmmaker should have done the due diligence into looking into who you are talking about. And I don't doubt that he did it a little bit, but he couldn't have done it enough to allow this person to manipulatively come onto his platform and speak in the way that she did without even challenging her, without even mentioning when she brought up her story of trauma of, oh, why did you continue after they broke up? It's clear from the moment she started participating in this documentary, her whole goal was to bring a victim story into this and pull on the heartstrings of the audience out there. Because look, nobody wants to hear somebody say, I'm a victim, and then dismiss that. Nobody wants to dismiss these stories, and I don't doubt that these things happened to Kendra, but unfortunately, it missed out so much context, and in my opinion, it is only more invalidating to real victims out there that they have allowed her to use this story as a bit of a justification for her horrible actions. But the thing is, the insanity doesn't end there, because more context should have been brought up in the fact of her saying that she was trying to protect her daughter, because if she was trying to do that, then why did she do this? Because Kendra allegedly encouraged Lauryn to get back together with Owen. At one point, she texted her daughter aggressive messages from her anonymous profile, telling her to basically sit close to Owen at a sports game, saying, sit next to him, move your ass, among other messages. If you were protecting your daughter from this individual, if you did not want this stuff to happen to her, then why were you also encouraging her to stay close to him? In my personal opinion, again, this is all my opinion, this whole video, but in my opinion, I think that she wanted to be in Owen's life as much as possible, and she most likely realized getting them to break up was a bad idea, as she was no longer seeing Owen, and she knew that she had to get them back together so she could have Owen more in her life once again. And another thing left out of the documentary is Kendra would also allegedly text other students asking for the details of the aggressive messages that Lauryn was receiving, and would ask them to comfort Lauryn when she was upset at school. Kendra also contacted Owen's younger sister and told her about the bullying that had allegedly affected Lauryn's choice in clothing. Again, why was this mother so interconnected with all of these students? Why did she have all of their phone numbers? My childhood best friend, even though I'm 28 years old, I don't have his mother's phone number. I never had her phone number. Sure, we're friends on Facebook, but I feel like that's kind of as far as it goes in most cases. But this woman clearly was connected with so many of these students. And at what point do you call this incredibly inappropriate? I don't think that the mother should have been having these conversations with any of these individuals. But Netflix just refused to mention or go into these details extensively. And ultimately, I think there is a dark truth behind that. And that all comes from the fact that, well, Kendra appeared in this documentary. Now, I'm not saying that Netflix directly came into this story with the objective of normalizing the behavior that Kendra displayed throughout all of this timeline, but I do think that Netflix know if you have a criminal documentary, sure, it can be, interesting. You get the victims in there, and that's still quite interesting, definitely people will watch. But if you get the criminal, the culprit, the villain in this story speaking throughout all of it, then you are going to get a banger of a show. And guess what? It was a banger of a show. Every single person I know has watched this show. When I put up an Instagram story about it, I have never in my life received so many messages saying, wow, yeah, I watched this show too. I post about media all the time. I have a Letterboxd account and nobody cares about that. But the moment I talk about this interesting show that features the villain, well, everyone's interested because naturally you would be. It's incredibly interesting to see a villain tell their own story. And knowing that, maybe Netflix decided that to get her to appear, that they'll maybe make the story a little bit easier on her. They'll maybe leave out some details. They'll maybe not bring up certain facts when Kendra defends herself. And maybe they'll let her get her sob story out there in order to get this woman to agree to appear on Netflix. And again, this is all just my opinion. Whole video, just my opinion. But I can't help but think that that opinion is bolstered when you look into more interviews from the creator of this show. Kendra's participation in this documentary was never a certainty, according to the creator of the show. In fact, much of the film had actually been completed before she agreed to be interviewed. It was a long process with Kendra. The creator recalls the efforts to get her on board, adding that she eventually agreed to the opportunity to directly speak to questions circling around the case. That was appealing to her, to sit down and tell the story from her perspective, and that Lauryn could see her do that. So yes, it was very clear from the beginning, in my opinion, that Netflix were having difficulty getting this person on board. There was a lot of haggling, there was a lot of debating, there was a lot of, we'll do this, you feature, it's good for both of us. And ultimately, they got this woman on their documentary out of appealing to Kendra. And seemingly that has come at the cost of allowing this person to tell her side of the story, her perspective, and allow her to lie to the general public and manipulate everybody. And what I find particularly interesting is that he confirms that they had actually filmed the majority of the documentary already before Kendra actually featured in any of it. Which is weird considering throughout the documentary she actually does become the center point of everything. And I think that's because Netflix realized that, well, this makes a much more interesting documentary than just the victims telling their story. This is fascinating and more people will watch. And unfortunately, that has now just led to everything that we're speaking about in this video and a complete disservice of justice to real victims that had the guts to appear in this documentary. As I said, the daughter Lauryn, Owen as well, they all seemed so devastated and terrified to feature in this documentary. And sadly, that was never repaid by Netflix because they allowed the mother to just get her manipulation out there for everyone to see. But what's more interesting is the fact that, well, the creator himself actually agrees that, well, clearly Kendra Licari was not exactly telling the full truth. I think her memories have sort of changed her version of the truth, Borgman says. I think she's got a bit of revisionist history. I think some of what she says is the truth, but I think in some of what she says it isn't truthful. Where those two intersect is constantly changing. Now, personally, I have a big issue with this. I feel like if you don't believe this person, you have to challenge them. You can still allow them to be on your documentary, but if you think that this criminal is not exactly speaking the truth, you need to challenge their words and make sure the truthful, real story gets out there. Now, Netflix may make the argument of, oh, if they did do that, then she wouldn't have agreed to be on the show and it wouldn't have been, as interesting and less people would have watched it. And yeah, I do agree with that. I do think that if she didn't feature, less people would have watched the documentary. But at the end of the day, this is a real story. There are real victims involved, as I will keep on repeating. And I don't think that just because it would bring less, numbers in, you should sacrifice the fact that this is a real story. You have the due diligence as a multi-billion-dollar company to treat these stories with care and respect. This isn't a YouTuber true crime video. This is a real thing. The documentary actually included the real victims, and you could just give them a little bit of respect that they deserve by actually challenging the culprit in this story. But no, they did not, because again, in my opinion, they wanted to make as much money as possible and get this documentary seen by as many people as possible. And it just led to Kendra Licari, who is a convicted felon, she did go to jail for this, being treated like a bit of a wounded puppy with a sob story. And with that, let's move into the arrest and court proceedings, because these really do reflect that this story is far worse than we originally thought. Because yes, Kendra was arrested on December the 12th, 2022, and she was facing up to 10 years in prison. Some of the conditions of her bond was that she was not allowed contact with Lauryn and had to wear a GPS tether, and she was not allowed to go to certain locations, including her daughter's residence, and she did file to have the no contact order lifted, but that was denied. But what's interesting is Kendra did not take that seriously. In fact, she just outright ignored everything in her bond conditions. As on March the 2nd, 2023, Kendra was arrested again after the police found out that she had broken her bond conditions by being at her daughter's residence at New Year's Eve 2022. And people might say, oh, well, she should have been with her daughter on New Year's Eve. Her daughter wanted to be there and that's why it's fine. No. Something which I think is a bit of an uncomfortable conversation that we're going to need to have is the fact that, well, in this documentary, the daughter does claim to still love her mother, and I don't doubt that, absolutely. But the problem is this is still a very fresh and new story. This only took place in 2022 and 2021 and is still ongoing to this day in some of the proceedings from what happened with courts. And I feel like the daughter, when she becomes a grown adult, when she gets older, when she matures, she will look back on what her mother did to her in a far more different way. And personally, I would not be surprised if she does lose her love for her mother, because right now she is still a child. But I think that in a few years' time or 10 years' time, she will realize the sheer severity of the fact that her mother was trying to convince her to do the worst possible thing. And yeah, I think the uncomfortable conversation is even if the daughter wants to see her, I personally don't think that that should be allowed. This woman is manipulative, she's dangerous, she's calculated, and this child is still a child, and we have seen her be manipulated before, and we're probably going to see her be manipulated by her mother again. And I think these bond conditions are completely correct, and despite that, despite the consequences of her own actions, despite going to jail, Kendra Licari disregarded that. She disregarded the law, she disregarded her criminal actions, and tried to go and see her daughter. This case was so bad that even the judge in charge of the case said this is a truly horrible case. It's kind of the case that's making me glad that at the end of my term, I'm retiring. Sometimes you see the worst in human nature. And again, I should reiterate that Netflix saw all of this and stated, hey, Kendra, go ahead and tell your story. The judge even said, I can't imagine any parent saying such horrible things to her own daughter. And then somebody else weighed into the judge that a parent's job is to care and nurture their child, and that Kendra failed that and used her education and background in tech to try and frame a minor for this crime. And again, another thing that Netflix really do focus to hone in on, yes, they do mention it throughout the story, but not enough in my personal opinion, that yes, aside from Owen and aside from Lauryn, she also tried to ruin Chloe's life. But the insanity only continues when you discover the fact that Kendra, to this day of recording, is still on supervised parole until February 2026. As part of the conditions of her supervised release, she is not allowed to leave the state and must make earnest efforts to find and maintain employment, and she is also not allowed to see her daughters per agreements from the plea deal, and she has not seen her daughter in over a year and a half. That is how serious and new this situation is. She is still, as of recording this video, on supervised parole, and yet Netflix are making a documentary about that featuring her. I've said it before, but I'll say it again. I think this is incredibly irresponsible for the fact that this is still fresh and the children are still children. If they were grown adults, I would understand them featuring in this documentary, but personally, I don't necessarily agree with them featuring. The adults in the story being told, I think that's fine, but the kids in this documentary, Kendra being in this documentary when she's not even allowed to see her own daughter, I just think it's a step too far, given how fresh in the minds this will still be for all of those children. The only person that has really benefited throughout all of this, in my opinion, is the culprit, the criminal, the one on supervised parole. It is all just benefiting Kendra Licari. And with that, I really want to keep on honing in on how serious of a situation this is, because I understand with a Netflix documentary, it usually just comes with a bunch of drama and speculation, but with this situation in particular, I feel like there are just so many victims that have been let down by the style of this documentary, by the lack of challenging of Kendra Licari in this situation, and I think the best way possible to truly reflect the serious nature of this situation is these court documents that you're seeing right here. Now, this document in particular is a redacted document, and the full court documents aren't out there as far as I know, but the ones that we do have publicly available to us right now do really show how serious of a situation this was. Because firstly, look at the amount of witnesses there are in this situation. Dan Boyer, William Chilman, Detective Sergeant Scott Clark, AC, Deputy Levi Davies, KH, MJ, LL, Sean Licari, Travis Lloyd, Sheriff Michael Main, Dave McKenny, Jill McKenny, OM, Ray McQueen, Bradley Peter, AR, BS, ESET, SW, Craig Wilson, KW, Tammy Wilson. That's basically half the population of all of the adults in this town, and they are all impacted and involved in this situation. Yes, I have my criticism of how it was investigated in terms of why did it take so long for a cyber expert to get involved, but overall, Kendra has really shown the fact that she is an incredibly manipulative and intelligent person. She knows how to manipulate people, she knows how to get away with these things, and I just don't really feel that Netflix have done their due diligence in challenging this person. And again, when you look into this document like we're about to do, it really does just confuse you even more. Because when you go to count 1, which is stalking a minor, in the description it says, on or about from September the 13th, 2021 to February 28, 2022, Kendra engaged in a willful course of conduct involving repeat or continuing harassment of confidential victim whilst being 5 or more years older than the confidential victim. Owen, who was less than 18 years at some time during this course of conduct, the conduct being such that would cause a reasonable person to feel harassed, and such conduct did feel confidential victim and Owen to feel harassed contrary to MCL. This is all very serious and there is a lot of legal words here, but overall it just represents to us how truly terrible this got, and even the court realized that this is an adult woman doing this to a minor. And yes, if it was an adult doing it to an adult, it would still be serious, but this just makes it especially more serious. But then taken to the context, there are more than just one count in this document, there are 5. Count number 2 reads, computer internets communicating with another to commit a crime, maximum imprisonment of 4 years or more, but less than 10 years. On or about from September the 13th, 2021 to February 28, 2022, she used a computer and the internet to communicate with confidential victim Owen for the purpose of committing stalking a minor, where the victim or intended Owen was a minor, contrary to MCL. Again, another court count for stalking a minor, but it doesn't end there. Because below that it states, saw a notice, this is a tier 2 offense under the Offender Registration Act. If the underlying offence is in violation of MCL, it is a tier 3 offence if the defendant has prior conviction for a tier 2 offence. And I feel like, again, this was barely even focused on during the documentary. Again, they tried to treat Kendra like she was this victim who had this sob story that pushed her into doing all of this, but the reality is this court were considering putting her on the registration. And I'm not talking about the school registration, I'm talking about the worst possible registration act that you can be on as a grown adult. But again, it doesn't end there, because we go into count 3, which is a similar one, as there are repeat offences here, which are basically the same offences between Owen and Lauryn, because yes, she stalked both of them in count 3, count 4, count 2, and count 1, and all of these offences can again be registered under the specific act that was spoken about just now. Even count 5, it starts to go into Chloe's story of the obstruction of justice, because about from September the 13th, 2021 to February 28, 2022, she committed the crime of obstruction of justice by attempting to frame another student for the crime during the stalking investigation. And this all just brings me back to the South Park analogy that I mentioned earlier, because if this was a grown 50 or 40-year-old man or 30-year-old man, or just in general an adult man doing all of these crimes with minors, we would all be saying this person is despicable, they're awful. We wouldn't be listening to their sob story, especially with the amount of lies that are scattered throughout it. We would be saying this person needs the book thrown at them, they need to go to jail for a very long time. And yet with Kendra, I've seen people sympathetic to her story. Netflix, in my opinion, just based on what I've seen the creators say, again, in my opinion, it gives me the vibe that even they were sympathetic towards Kendra's story. And yes, maybe that was just a facade and comes from the fact they were just trying to convince her to come on to the documentary, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's a justification for treating this person like they're possibly a victim as well. And it's clear even the other families involved in the situation, particularly Owen's family, agree with what I'm saying here, because during the court proceedings, Owen's family looked at Kendra in the eyes and said this to her. Isabella County Prosecutor David Barberi said, "This is one of the most confusing and complicated cases he's had to deal with, not only from the case itself, but also when it came to sentencing. They hoped to let the victims have a say, but the two victims here, Licari's daughter and her boyfriend, had different expectations. She was hoping for leniency. She didn't want to feel responsible for putting her mother in prison. Again, this just shows the sheer manipulative nature of Kendra Licari. Her daughter didn't want her to go to jail for a wrong time because she felt responsible. How truly sickening is that? And then again, taken to the context that Netflix were comfortable with both of these featuring in the same documentary. It's just absolutely wild. The other victim, however, Owen McKenny, his family wanted the book thrown at Licari, saying they couldn't understand how a mother could do what she did for as long as she did and with the long-term impact it's going to have on their son. Prison is a good start, said Jill McKenny, Owen's mother. Give her some time to think about what she did. Time away from her daughter and everyone else. And yes, I completely agree with what she's saying here, and now she doesn't directly say it, but I can only assume she was expecting a much larger sentence than Kendra actually got. In the packed courtroom on Wednesday, Isabella County Judge Mark Duffy handed down the sentence after hearing from Licari herself and some of her victims. It felt good. It felt good to actually look her in the eye, said Jill. It felt good to just address her and ask why. I know I'll never get the reason, a true reason, but it just felt good to address her today. Licari was emotional in her statement. She apologized profusely and said she is getting help for her own mental illness and trauma. I think for somebody to do what they've done, there's clearly something not right, said David McKenny, Owen's father, but I'm not a big fan of using that as a reason to blame it on that. Licari helped Jill through the process. They came together to find out who was sending those messages. They were the ones who turned to the police in the first place together. Licari knowing the whole time she was the source. To me, there was enough time in the 2.5-year span to stop what she was doing, and she chose to continue, said Jill. At that point, my empathy kind of falls off. She saw the damage she was causing and continued with it. Licari is heading to prison, and her victims now get some closure and peace. It feels a lot better that I'm going to have my privacy now, said Owen. I can start being with my friends again and not have to worry about things, and that feels really, really nice. It feels really nice now, but the long-term impact is yet to be seen. That was a major reason why Judge Duffy made sure she went to prison instead of a county jail for a year followed by probation. And this is yet again another thing that I think the Netflix documentary fails to address, and that is the long-term impacts that this could have on everyone in this story. Not just the adults, but the children in particular, because they haven't fully developed yet. They're still going to become an adult, and they have to deal with this long-term impact. This could absolutely decimate their trust for basically the rest of their life. This could affect their mental health in terms of anxiety, depression, and multiple other things. This is truly a life-altering event, and I really just don't think Netflix focused on this enough, because if they did, they would have challenged Kendra on this, or they would have just not let her on this documentary in general where she could give a sob story and try to manipulate everyone with her lies. And yeah, it is nice to see that these children finally got some level of peace and justice despite how unbelievably let down I think most of them has been, but I just don't think it was enough. And overall, I think a bigger important fact here is the fact that, well, this whole story is bigger than just cyberbullying. That's how Netflix kind of portrayed it. Oh, it's a catfishing case, it's a cyberbullying case. And yes, in the court documents, it very much is that. But in my humble opinion, not just with Netflix, but with the court proceedings as well, I feel all of the victims in this story have been let down on the fact that she only got around 19 months in jail. Based on what we've gone through, the predatory text messages, the attempt to ruin another teenager's life, the attempt to ruin multiple kids' life, I think that this should have been a far more serious sentence, and I really do not understand how she has gotten away with all of this. I believe that Kendra, in my opinion, is a predator, and yet she got away with everything and was even allowed to be on Netflix. But to kind of move into more positives, I should just say that the kids are seemingly doing well nowadays. In fact, Lauryn, Owen, and Chloe have actually graduated, which is great to see. And honestly, it seems that the town as well have not moved on from this, but it seems that they all kind of are uniting together. And you know, the way I spoke about at the beginning of this video of everyone at the town gets together when something bad has happened and unites, it feels like that is actually happening. Because there was a story that went round that apparently at a Halloween party, one of the mothers apparently dressed up as a scarecrow in a prison jumpsuit, which had a mask of Kendra's mugshot. And yeah, it feels like they're kind of all trying to deal with this in the best possible way by making jokes, by being comedic, and just in general by being together as one big unit. And I think that is really the best way they can all deal with everything that's happened here, because I don't doubt that a lot of these kids are going to have trust issues and trauma for the rest of their lives, but at least they have each other. Now, interestingly enough, Chloe was actually asked a question on TikTok if her mother dressed up as Kendra just completely for Halloween, and Chloe does actually confirm that this is a false rumor. Now, I don't know if this refers to the scarecrow thing or another story that was going around, but at the end of the day, I am just glad to see that these kids are still doing well. And interestingly, Chloe actually did jump onto TikTok to recount all of the events from her personal perspective, and I found it very interesting to listen to, mainly down to the fact that, well, this poor girl is receiving a lot of negative flack, and I get it. We don't like bullies. I get it, and I'm not saying you need to like this person, but sending her hatred is just bizarre in my opinion, and I just don't agree with it. And I am actually going to play her entire TikTok, which I get it if you don't want to sit through 9 minutes of it. I usually wouldn't just shove a whole ass TikTok in here, but I feel like given how she's gotten attention, it would be, it's important to get her story out there. So I am going to put her whole story here right now, and I feel like if you want to listen to it, you can. There is a timestamp on screen from right now to, if you want to, you can skip it. I'm not going to be breaking it down. I just wanted to allow her to get her form of events out there, because she didn't really say too much in the documentary. So yes, here is Chloe's form of events.
Hi guys, I'm Chloe. I'm one of the kids who got framed in The Unknown Number on Netflix that just came out today, and I was going to tell a little bit more of my story about it. Okay, so it started when we were like 7th, 8th grade, around there, and my mom has these like Halloween parties every year up until freshman year of high school. And just for a reference, no one was not invited. Anyone could come from Beale City, like it wasn't a invite. Like there was so many people that came to these. They weren't even parties. I don't know. A haunted trail. Anyway, I had no idea that there was a random text going around about her not getting invited to these parties until Kendra called or texted my mom and asked her if it was me who sent the text to Lauryn. So my mom got the text from Kendra, and she was like, no, like everyone was invited, like no, like there was no invite like to anyone, you could just go. So yeah, so fast forward to the end of 8th grade year. I still really didn't know about it. Like I heard like Owen was getting random text a little bit, but like not really that much about it. So I'm pretty sure this was the beginning of freshman year. It was around like volleyball time, kind of close to like December. And that's when, like, Owen asked me, like, hey, is this you? And I was like, I have no idea, like, what you're even talking about. Like, I, at this point, thought it was, like, one, like, bad text or, like, a couple of random texts that, like, someone sent. I was like, no, like, brush it off. Because I was like, no, I didn't send that text. Also, just to clarify, Owen and these two other girls were, like, we were all best friends freshman year. And we'd sit together in science class. So Owen had asked me like a couple of times about it, and like I kind of just blew it off because I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, no, just thought it was weird. Then he ended up telling my other two girlfriends, like, do you think it was Chloe? Like, do you think this is her? Like, it's gotta be her, blah, blah. Yeah. So all four of us would sit at a table in science class, and everything that we said would always end up in the text. Like, if I was going on a trip, it'd text to Lauryn and Owen and be like, oh, like, I'm going on this trip, blah, blah, blah. Like, yeah. Fast forward, it was the start of, like, basketball. So it was, like, December, January, February, around there of my freshman year. That's when Owen really started asking if it was me. And, like, in the documentary, it said, like, Owen's mom texted me through Owen's phone and was like, hey, is this you? Whatever. And I'm like, No. So I would get FaceTime calls from like Owen, and he'd ask me all the time, like, is this you? Is it you? Like, it happened pretty much every day, if not at least 2 to 3 times a week. Also, in the movie, it looked like I was a really mean girl, and yeah, maybe I wasn't the nicest all the time, but I was also going through a lot of shit at the time, obviously getting blamed 24/7, so I couldn't really trust anyone. So it basically just got to a point where I told Owen, like, just take my phone for the day, like, have it, see if you get texts. Obviously, I knew he would get texts because it wasn't me. So I was like, okay, just take my phone. I honestly don't care anymore. Like, whatever it takes to make you and everyone else think it's not me, I don't care. So eventually, as the messages start getting, like, worse and worse, and mind you, I still really don't even know how many there is, like, what's really going on. I still really don't know that much about it. But anyways, as they continued, they went to go tell the sheriff. And the sheriff found out, and this is also, like, during basketball season. So we had a game that was, like, 45 minutes away for basketball one night. And, like, I would come home from school crying to my mom and dad, like, every day. Obviously, you guys saw my dad was a cop, so he would sit there and just press me for hours and hours. When I got home, he'd take my phone at night, all of the above. But at the basketball game, after the game ended, my mom and dad came up to me and they took my phone. And so I was like, okay, like, why is my phone getting taken? I literally did nothing, but I had a feeling, obviously I knew, like, for some reason it had to do with the situation, I'm sure. So after the 45-minute long bus ride back to school, I get home eventually, and, like, they sit me in the living room, my parents do, and they're like, we got a call from Mike Main on the way to your game. And he said, like, we know it's Chloe, like, this just needs to stop, blah, 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 whatever. So the whole time between that, I just felt like no one believed me. Honestly, at that point, my own parents were still kind of like, okay, like, what did the sheriff find that, like, somehow, you know, proves me guilty for this? And all of the proof that Kendra and Owen's mom gave to the sheriff was all printed off. Like, obviously Owen's phone got dumped or whatever in the documentary, but I'm saying all the evidence at first that they got was like little screenshotted text sent off in a paper, printed out, and that's what the sheriff worked with to say it was me. So eventually I had to go to the sheriff's department in Mount Pleasant and talk to him, as you guys saw. Obviously, like, I wasn't that nervous talking to a cop because my dad is a police officer, but at the same time, like, I was almost in tears because I was just so frustrated that no one believed me, and now I was getting accused by a police officer that I was doing this. And yeah, so I gave him my phone just like face value, and he looked through and he was like, yeah, like, I see nothing, whatever, like, basically saying, oh yeah, like, you're fine, yeah, it's not you. So a couple weeks later, the texts are still happening and nothing's really, like, progressing ever. So eventually my dad's like, well, what do you want to do to, like, prove you're not guilty? And I was literally a 14-year-old girl, 13 when it happened, 14 years old, 15 maybe when all of this really started happening. But anyways, my dad was telling me all these, like, what I should do, like, if I should dump my phone, if I should do this. And so I was like, I honestly don't care, like, take all my stuff, do whatever, I don't care. But anyways, I got my phone completely dumped, and I told Owen and my 2 girlfriends, like, hey, like, I'm showing you, it's not me, you know, whatever. But my 2 girlfriends were pretty much always on my side, like, they were really good to me during this time and everything. And then, like, a couple weeks later, once again, like, I got my phone taken because the texts were still happening, and, like, the sheriff would go back and forth with saying, like, oh yeah, like, you're totally fine. He told me that to my face, like, you're totally fine, like, I'm gonna list you as a victim. Never did that. He literally said he's gonna list me as a victim, all these things, and it just never happened. So, like, on my 6th or 7th time talking to the sheriff, I don't know what to do anymore. Like I say, dump my Wi-Fi, like literally do whatever you want. I don't care. So a couple more weeks went on, just always every day, just back and forth with my parents. Like, this is something new that happened. Me and my dad sat down and highlighted like every single thing in these like stacks of papers that were given to the sheriff. We would sit down and highlight, like, where was I? When was I doing this? Like, she would track me everywhere I was in Florida. We'd go up north. She'd always have my area code, no matter where I was, like, everywhere. It always looked like it was from me. Pretty shortly after that, actually not really shortly, it was like a year and a half, as you saw in the documentary, of me just being accused really, really badly, in and out of the sheriff's office, dumping my phone, getting screamed at by my parents, having my friends ask me, like, a couple times every couple weeks, whatever, like, is this you? Are you doing this? And it just, like, did not feel very great. But anyways, Kendra confessed. I think that's a little bit sketchy. I spoke in court. I don't really have that much time left in this video, so I'm kind of summing up quick. If you want part 2, I'll give you part 2. But here is what I said in court when I went. Yeah, you can pause at any of that if you want to read it. But that's some of my story on what happened. It was definitely a really hard year and a half for a lot of us kids.
So yes, moving on from the children in this story and everything else that's happened in this story, I now want to end this by going back and focusing on Kendra Licari. Because the big defense she had surrounding all of this in this situation was that, well, she was very traumatized, severely mentally ill, and overall not doing well. But something that really irritated me about this section of the Netflix documentary is they never really go into specifics surrounding her mental health. And I think that personally, this is a very important part of the story. Now, I'm not somebody to usually speculate on a mental health diagnosis, but I feel like if you're going to use mental health as a direct defense for your disgusting criminal actions, I think that you actually should go into direct detail about what this could be. Now, there's like fleeting mentions of it towards the ending of the documentary, but really, it's nothing detailed. They ask a few parents about what they think it could have been, but realistically, there's no concrete detail, and I think that's an incredibly large missed opportunity. I feel like they could have got a psychologist to sit down and give their perspective on what they think this really is, and maybe even speak to Kendra if she's going to feature in this documentary, at least get some analysis that can help us understand why she went down this path. But no, they just don't do that. And yeah, I have no doubts in my mind that Kendra is a severely mentally ill woman. Nobody would have done what she did if they weren't mentally ill. But it just kind of glosses over the mental illness part, and I think that's confusing because I think if you're going to hear her perspective, we need to understand why she did what she did. As I mentioned earlier, prevention is a very key thing, and I think it would really help a lot of people out there if they just explained what was going on in her mind. But realistically, they just kind of speculate and are like, oh, it could be cyber Munchausen's, but it's like, I don't think that's enough. I think in a very serious story where victims are involved and you've got the actual culprit in this, you need to go into detail to help cause prevention, but we know this isn't about prevention. This is all just about entertainment and numbers. Now, from my own research, I did find out that Kendra has spoken about the fact that she has been getting counseling and she does have a mental illness diagnosis, and she's mentioned things like anxiety and depression. But I'm not going to lie to you, I know a lot of people that have depression and anxiety, and I don't think that depression and anxiety have pushed any of my friends into doing the things that she has done, and I realistically do not think that this is what caused her to do the things that she did, and I think that this just isn't enough. As I mentioned before, somebody in the documentary suggests that Kendra has cyber Munchausen's, which is where an individual fakes or exaggerates illness in an online environment to get attention or sympathy, but that's not what happened in this story. That's not even directly, it doesn't reflect any of what happened in this story, so no, I don't think it's that. And again, it's just more frustrating because they say that and it's like, that's that. Now, the creator of the show in an interview goes on to speak about Kendra speaking about her assault that happened at the age that Lauryn's at, and she says that, she speaks about how scary it was to see her child growing into the age that she was at when these things happened to her. But again, I just don't feel like this is a valid argument or really relative to her mental health, because at the end of the day, she was putting pressure on her child to take her own the worst possible thing. He even goes on to state that giving any form of medical foundation is a little bit problematic, but that there are elements of the story that could be to do with Munchausen by proxy, and about how harming someone to keep them close is definitely something that existed. But honestly, again, I think this is a load of bollocks, because I don't really get why this would be problematic. You're speaking about a very serious situation where somebody clearly is severely mentally ill, and if you're going to pretend to care about this story, or at least be treating the story with some form of sincerity, then I feel like you actually should have dove into the mental health aspect of all of this way more than you actually did, rather than just dub it as problematic. It's not problematic to go through these very, if not most key elements of this story, but instead they've just ignored them and allowed us to just come on here and speculate, oh, she might have cyber Munchausen's, which doesn't make any sense because Munchausen's has nothing to do with any of this. But given that I have no academic background in psychology, I thought it would only be important to go through this article that I found here, where a licensed psychologist called Dr. Michaela Sano weighs in on this documentary from Netflix. It goes through the synopsis of what happened between Lauryn, Kenny, and the mother, and it says, Sano took to TikTok to share her thoughts about the situation and attempted to explain Kendra's thought process. What would make a mother harass and torment her own daughter? Sano asked at the beginning of the clip. After noting that Kendra wasn't just a mum under stress, she explained that she felt a deep need for control. Sano said that Kendra treated Lauryn as an extension of her own identity, instead of as a daughter. Everything, the messages, the lies, the manipulation, it was all about power and ego, but not love. It was deliberate because she needed to control the story and the narrative and keep that dominance. Sano continued, hurting Lauryn kept her scared and dependent and easy to manipulate. Sano added that Kendra's decision to cyberbully Lauryn wasn't a mistake. It was a disguised as care. Another topic Sano addressed was whether or not digital Munchausen is real. Digital Munchausen takes place when medically well individuals fake recognized illnesses in virtual environments, such as online support groups, according to the National Library of Medicine. Munchausen is very real, and Kendra's behavior is a perfect example. It's when someone fabricates illness, danger, or crisis online to gain attention or sympathy or control, Sano said. In Kendra's case, this isn't just Munchausen by internet, it's a behavioral pattern sitting on top of a narcissistic personality structure. Munchausen is the strategy she used to get attention and manipulate people, but the narcissism is what drives it. The need for control, admiration, and power over others. Sano said that the distinction matters because she will likely hide behind the Munchausen label, and the public may focus on it in a way that softens their judgment of her. Later on in the clip, Sano said that the documentary made the mistake of not including a psychologist to provide context about the inner workings of Kendra's mind. And yes, this all basically confirms what I've been saying throughout this. Netflix absolutely failed in portraying this person as a villain, as the villain that she really is, and they allowed her to pretty much just present herself as a victim in this story by basically manipulating everybody and lying to everybody, and having people on there speculate, stating, oh, it's Munchausen's, it's cyber Munchausen's, clearly does not help in this situation and only added to Kendra's sob story. It just feels from top to bottom, start to finish, Netflix have really blundered this story, and it feels like their main objective in this story wasn't justice, but it was just creating another entertaining film uploaded that month onto their platform. And it's a shame because I feel like a real genuine conversation about this story could have started, and a good conversation around specific mental health illnesses could have been produced. Not justifications for actions, but explanations and understandings of where people's minds can really push them, even into the most evil and darkest of territories. But no, we just got a sloppily put together mess that allowed someone to defend themselves and nobody ever combated against her, and it just basically dismissed tons of victims' stories. And overall, to conclude this video, I think it's a damn shame that it has gotten to this. I think it's an absolute miss that we didn't get a productive conversation from any of this. And overall, at the end of the day, I think socially, not criminally because she was charged, but socially, This has allowed Kendra Licari to get away with things much more because there are now sympathizers out there for this woman. There are people out there that don't know the full context of this story. They don't know that she continued to message Owen after everything, even though she claims she was trying to protect her daughter. And ultimately, I think Kendra Licari, in my opinion, as I've said multiple times now, is a predator, and I don't think she should have been allowed this position that Netflix gave her. I don't even think she should be out of a jail cell, because this is a dangerous woman who attempted to ruin multiple people's lives, including her daughter, and even in this documentary, in my opinion, she is still trying to manipulate her daughter by using her own trauma against her. This has been a really disturbing and weird and creepy story, and I definitely don't think we'll ever have anything like this again for at least a while, but I really do hope that maybe another documentarian picks up this story and does a better job at it, or maybe, the guy that made this comes out and is like, we could have done better, and maybe they do a sequel and dive into this further, because I really feel like there could have been something more productive that came out of all of this, but all we really got was just a big load of slop. And yeah, I think I'll end the video there. Because yeah, I don't really have many more thoughts on it other than there, and if I continue, I'll just be repeating myself like I already have done throughout this video. I'm sorry if I have been repeating myself a little bit, it's just I have so many thoughts that just keep on exploding out, and so much confusion surrounding all of this. So I would love to know your guys' thoughts and opinions on all of this. Genuinely, let's get a conversation going. Please go into the comment section and let me know what you guys all think about all of this, because this story is so crazy, and I just need to talk to people about this. So yeah, please let me know your thoughts down below. Please follow my Instagram at inabber, where you can watch me talk about more media, and I will be recording a podcast on the Over the Pond podcast where we speak about this topic, because I want to go into this in more detail in a free-flowing environment and conversation with my podcast co-host. And yeah, I've got to go. I've got to end this video now because I've been speaking for so long. It's like a 3-hour recording, and yeah, have a good weekend, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Please subscribe for more stories about insane families, mainly to do with TikTok, but if there are more things that happen on Netflix like this, I will talk about them in the future. I don't know how this video is going to do. It's a little bit different. I never really talk about Netflix documentaries, so if you want that, let me know. I'm going to go. Bye-bye, everyone. Peace out. Have a great week. See you later.